Well, good morning, everybody. It's Friday morning, bright and early. Oh, I don't know, probably 5:30, getting on towards 6 o'clock in the morning. And the result of the typhoon was a night full of unexpected disasters. The primary being, as you can well see, the boat is aground. Sunshine. Contributing cause, I'm going to show you. You can see that green floating in the water there. That's the top of a tree. Sometime during the night, in the peak of the storm, I suspect, when it was blowing 70 knots or so from the north, and the waves were about 4 feet high, and there was driving rain, this tree floated down and hooked itself quite firmly to my mooring line, which of course greatly increased the drag on my mooring and upset its stability, I suspect. Now, in addition to that, poor decision on my part was to leave the dinghy in the water. I've got it up now, drained the water out. And not totally unexpectedly, it filled with water. But due to the action of the waves, it knocked all the thwarts out. And they floated off somewhere, I have no idea where. So I can't use the dinghy. Another unforeseen problem is that before we went up ran aground here, I was desperately trying to get the boat to go to port over that way into deeper water. And I was going to go over there and drop my secondary bow anchor and use it to help hold the boat over that way. Yes, to hold the boat over there in deeper water with the secondary bow anchor. Oh, another bit of excitement. An unattended boat came drifting by in the middle of the storm, and I didn't even see it until it was right next to me. It's way over there on the distance on the beach. It's a steel boat, so it'd probably be okay. The owner, I think, is in Negros. Anyway, you can see there's my own personal tree hanging on the mooring lines. And the water out there is fairly shallow. I suspect right here where the boat is, it's maybe 3 feet deep. And what Dee Dee and I are attempting to do is figure out some way to get a line on that tree. On the, as you're looking at it, on the right end, there's a big root ball there. And the fork in the tree is nicely situated right over the mooring lines. And the top of the tree has snagged into the chain from my primary anchor. So all of those factors combined, I believe, is the reason that my mooring didn't hold. I could be completely wrong, of course. There's also another mitigating factor, which I will get into in a later video. There he goes, finally. that boat over there is So Long. That's the one that went drifting by me. We played tag for quite a few hours. I didn't realize the amount of trouble he ran into with his boat. But he also had his dinghy in the water with the outboard attached, and both are now gone. Well, it's about 7 o'clock Sunday morning. You see that little tiny island there just past that other boat? That's a new little island. I think it's a big pile of debris on top of the reef over there. That was created by the Typhoon. And over there in the distance is the top of the reef that joins the island to the mainland over there. And that's what protects the harbor here from east or southeast winds. Did a pretty good job during the typhoon, but of course at the height of the typhoon was high tide, so we're getting a lot of not so much waves but storm surge, because it was blowing water into the harbor over that reef, and the current from the inflow of water here in the harbor was 5 knots, because it comes in over the reef there, which is more or less to the east, and escapes over there, which is more or less to the north. Well, hello. It's Tuesday afternoon after the storm, and just doing a little cruise around the bay here, the harbor. You can just see off there in the distance. That's the boat that went zooming by between Sunshine and So Long in the middle of the night. It almost looks like he's way up in the mangroves. I'm going to go over and get a little closer. He did try to get the boat out of there on the high tides that followed the owner, but the tide wasn't high enough, because he's got to get the boat turned around. And the problem is, this whole area out here, the water is shallow, probably nowhere more than about 6 feet. And since his boat was driven in there by 60 or 70 mile an hour winds, plus a 1 meter surge tide, I can only say I hope he has something to get him out of there. I think he contacted one of the small tugboats here in the harbor, but the captain said, no way, water's too shallow for me to get my tugboat back in here. Well, there she sits. The good news is it looks like he was able to get the boat turned around with the bow towards the water, because when it went by me, the bow was going downwind, of course. So he's set to return the early part of January, when we get the next biggest high tides. And hopefully he can get himself off of there. I mean, I'm sitting not too far from where his boat is. Looks like the water's maybe 4 feet deep here. His draft is 6 feet. But he does have twin bilge keels, so the boat's sitting level, which is handy. Pretty sure he has some caretakers staying on the boat, because morning after the storm, somebody came out here pretty early, and there were already 10 people, locals, climbing all over the boat, probably looking to see what they could take home with them. So they chased them away, and he's keeping somebody on the boat until he returns. I hope it all goes well for him, and that he's able to get the boat off of there. By the way, his mooring was quite adequate. It didn't break. It was a big chunk of concrete, which the storm managed to suck right up out of the mud and drag along with the boat all the way over here. Now, he was in probably the northernmost boat in the harbor, so he was the closest to the north entrance, and perhaps the surge tide current was the strongest there, and that's why his boat got dislodged, or his mooring. No telling. In case you were wondering, that's the tree that hooked on my mooring. You can see it's kind of laying down there. All the branches, big old root ball. I think that's it anyway. I could be wrong. There's another one directly away from me in the camera on the other side of this little island. It's possible that that is the, or what's left of the tree that hooked on my mooring line. Because we had to chop it up into a couple of different pieces with a sawzall in order to be able to move it. In any case, that one has the potential to float off again, unfortunately. But if the wind's from the north, as it is now, it'll just hopefully go right over there and get lodged in amongst the mangroves there. That's another boat that had a little bit of misfortune. It's a locally built catamaran. They're built by a man down on the south end of Negros. I'm not sure he's building them anymore. He's quite old. Anyway, Tom, the owner, was aboard, and I don't know if it was the mooring he was on or if it was anchor drug. One or the other. Something gave way in the early hours of the morning, and he slowly drifted over. Now, that catamaran was not there. He was over, actually back behind where I am right now in my dinghy on a different mooring. But there's some fish traps over there, and Tom drifted over there next to the fish traps, and the tide went out. And he just sat on the bottom. You know, it's a catamaran, the boat sat level. He waited until later in the morning when the tide was up, and of course some of the other cruisers in here got over there with their dinghies and pulled him off, got him back over here. He's on another mooring, I do believe. At least he's got 2 bow lines out there. I'm not sure if that's a bridle to an anchor or a bridle to a mooring. There was another boat out here, about a 35-footer, that was, I think, on a mooring. 2 different people had put their own moorings in. There were like big stainless steel screws screwed down into the bottom. One boat was attached to one of those, and it broke. Fortunately, the owner was aboard his boat, and he had 2 bow anchors ready to set, which he did almost immediately, and that held his boat no problems. So I got one mooring drug, actually two, because mine also did. One mooring broke, and then there was Tim on So Long. He had 2 half-inch nylon lines to his self-installed mooring, and his boat, even though it's only 32 feet long, is quite heavy. Has a really deep, full keel, and he snapped both of those half-inch lines. And he had a small secondary bow anchor. He set that. The road for that broke. Then he headed out this way, which is the direction I was also headed, and that's why he sat for so long off my port side. Made it impossible for me to turn my boat to port to head towards deeper water. Anyway, he got his bow anchor out, the main bow anchor, all on chain, and the chain broke. And then he put his stern anchor out. That's why he was hanging stern to. And somewhere in all of that, the stern anchor rod also broke. In addition to the fact that his steering cable, one of his steering cables, broke. So he had pretty much had no control over his boat, and it drifted over that way on the other side of my boat, where it is located now, in between a couple of ships. And the crews on the ships tried to help him out, but they wound up getting one of those great big tires they use as fenders, wrapped around his port upper shroud, and snapped that. And he was bouncing around back and forth between the ships like a ping pong ball. Evidently bent a whole bunch of his stanchions and caused a lot of cosmetic damage to the boat. He's over in the marina now. So all things considered, nothing completely disastrous. Tim probably got the worst of it for damage. And Brett, with his boat back over there in the mangroves, has probably got the hardest one to retrieve. Now perhaps the most mysterious and bizarre thing that happened, for which I have absolutely no answer. This is my auxiliary rudder, self-made, self-steering gear. Wind vane is up there, and it operates with a trim tab here on the auxiliary rudder, so it requires very little power from the input device, whether it's autopilot or the wind vane. Anyway, that's a piece of half-inch diameter, 3/16 stainless steel, to which I built or added a little wooden foil where it is below the water line, and that acts like the little rudder that turns the bigger rudder, which turns the boat. Now the bizarre thing is that right down here, right there, that piece of half-inch stainless steel snapped, and the whole blade, the bottom end of that shaft, is gone. Now, the shaft goes all the way down to the bottom of the auxiliary rudder, and it rests in a gudgeon down there. You can't really see in the water. So I'm not quite sure how or why it failed. I was thinking perhaps somehow, yeah, the gudgeon's still down there. It looks like it's in good shape. Somehow the dinghy got hooked up in there, but I don't know. I had no idea it happened until sometime later the next morning, and I just happened to look down there and see it.